Call the Honourable Darren Hughes.
Mr Speaker, I rise to take a call on the third reading of the Rugby World Cup bill somewhat unexpectedly, but I was so entranced by the Keith Quinn-like quality of the commentary from the senior government whip. You think less Keith Quinn, more Murray Mexted? Is that what the member's saying?
Close to Murray, yeah.
Well, I think, sir, that it was a great tribute to the 50 years of New Zealand television programmes that were obviously being screened earlier in the year, that the member opposite had such instant recall of that particular game in 1961 and had a big impact on him from 49 years ago. But, sir, while we're all, of course, very keen to be supportive of the Rugby World Cup and make sure that it goes smoothly, the truth is that this legislation is not needed for the success of that tournament next year. This is...
not all of it.
No, the parts that are opposed by the Labour opposition are not needed. That is the truth. Part 4 is the part that we have struck our opposition to, and while the member opposite was full of praise for trade deals, a bipartisan matter where the current government is able to pick up the work of the previous government and is doing a fine job in that respect, it is a testimony to the failure of the Rugby World Cup Minister, Mr McCulley's negotiation skills, that this bill has A, taken so long to go through the Parliament, and B, is not passing through the Parliament with unanimous support. This should be the sort of legislation which all parties across the House want to agree on. There is nobody, I don't know anybody in Parliament who doesn't want the Rugby World Cup 2011 to be a fantastic success and an amazing event for our country, both the staging of the competition and, of course, the result in that final game. We all have a very strong view on that. And the inability of the Minister for the Rugby World Cup to simply get an agreement on a bill like this bodes very, very badly for the organisation and planning of the wider tournament from a governance perspective in 2011. And that's something that I think if the Associate Minister for the Rugby World Cup, because of course in New Zealand we must have two ministers responsible for such a tournament,
with McCulley as a minister, he does need a handhold.
Well, when Murray McCulley was given the primary portfolio, it necessitated the appointment of an associate in the form of the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, who's really brought the grunts to that portfolio and could have actually probably intervened and worked with other parties, which he's very good at doing, to ensure that Part 4 was amended in a way that had parliamentary support. He is the ultimate prop in that respect, if he could have been able to support Mr McCulley. But for reasons beyond all of us, that has never been something that Mr McCulley has been good at doing. Mr McCulley's consistent strength is not only to divide the opposition, he manages to divide his own colleagues as well. There is a consistency in his form and in his play. And so what the Labour opposition is saying is that Part 4, the aspect, I should say, that refers to the liquor licensing authority provisions of the bill, confer on the minister far too much power and far too little oversight. And Mr Mallard, the Honourable Trevor Mallard, former portfolio holder of the Rugby World Cup portfolio in the days when it didn't require two ministers, just one, that was an opportunity where he was able to put forward some amendments. Sorry? Mr Cosgrove was a subsequent minister in that portfolio. He was standalone as well. It wasn't until the change of government when we were going to shift officers from the back line to the front line, almost literally I suspect in that regard, that we saw we had to double the number of politicians responsible for the Rugby World Cup. And this is their result, sir. The third reading tonight is the result of two ministers' work trying to unite the Parliament, and it has failed to do so. Mr Mallard's amendment would have put some worthy oversight around the provisions, because we're actually now going to be passing a bill into law that says that when an independent authority makes a decision, that can be overturned by a minister without any reference back to any other authority, without any parliamentary oversight whatsoever. Now, of course, people know that there has been criticism of this House for the unanimous vote to confer powers onto the Minister for the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, people concerned that there was not enough oversight in that legislation. And in fact, there have actually been a lot of parliamentary safeguards built into that law in response to some of that criticism that all parties were cognisant of. And my colleague Charles Chauvel asserts that Minister Brownlee has been very responsible in his use of that legislation, and I think the consultation has been good. But on this piece of legislation, there are less safeguards for the public and less parliamentary oversight than what there is. There are fewer safeguards, I'm told by the Education Shadow Minister, that exist in this legislation and that exists in the Canterbury earthquake legislation. Now, with respect to that was a piece of legislation written in a hurry in response to certain events in our country with which all of us wanted to see a recovery effort made without hindrance or delay. There was a rationale for that. For this, there is no reason for which so much power should be given to a minister, and that is one of the things we've been arguing very strongly, is that this has to be on a principles-based approach. There's a lot of pressure on the country next year to make sure that this event is well organised. We want it to be. Everyone wants this to be a success. Our fear, in addition to our perennial four-yearly fear that we don't uplift the trophy, the cup, our additional fear this time is that the games won't, the tournament. Sorry?
4 yearly is not perennial.
Quadrennial. I'm sorry, I'm not up with this street lingo of quadrennial. That is all the rave at the Wainuiomata Mall when the member's doing his constituency work. But these are these. Well, that's true. That's true. Of course, when you're pre-Vatican Council, I guess the Latin language comes a lot earlier to those followers of Catholicism in that respect. But that is not a blessing on all of us. But when this comes along, we're always worried about the result. Of course, our additional worry this time, sir, is around whether or not we can be organised to put on a good tournament. So the idea of legislation to ensure that some aspects of the planning are streamlined is not without support in the Parliament. I think a lot of people would have approached that matter favourably. But what has caused this bill to be so delayed has been the obstinance of the Minister, Murray McCully, to listen to anyone other than himself. He's not listened to the amendments, he has not accepted the hand of bipartisanship, and as a result his legislation has been held up because we're trying to make the point that this shouldn't be the way that legislation is handled when there is the opportunity for it to change. The SOP by Trevor Mallard would have stipulated that the Minister cannot grant an urgent approval which has not been granted by the authority. Now, the authority, of course, is governed under its own statute for very good reason. It's settled law in that respect. And it would have made sense for there to be some consistency when a ministerial decision is being made. What makes this even more difficult for the Parliament, sir, is that the Parliament will probably, almost certainly, not be sitting during the Rugby World Cup for a number of reasons. One, Tories never go past a free ticket to a game. Secondly, there was some truths are always self-evident. So, of course, we know there's one more. We know there's one free ticket going now. We know there's one free ticket going now because there's somebody over there who would have been invited who won't be anymore. So I'm sure there'll be probably two actually, that you can guarantee that they would have taken the maximum entitlement in that respect. But the reason will be that there either will have already been a general election just held if the government goes to the polls in August next year, and John Key may well do that if he doesn't trust Murray McCully's organisation of this tournament. The biggest fear the Prime Minister would have would be not that we don't win the Rugby World Cup. Everyone in this House thinks we'll do that. His biggest fear will be that the games are not organised enough and that it will be a shambles in Auckland. He'll be worried about Murray McCully's judgment, as so many leaders have been, but normally at the point that they're ex-leaders they worry about the judgment. So the Parliament will not have met for the first time, or additionally, if the election is held in November, then the Parliament will have been prorogued for the campaign. So when these decisions are made by the Minister, there are no safeguards built into this, and the Parliament will not be sitting. The Parliament will have either not been called together, or this Parliament would have finished. So we are investing a lot of power in Murray McCully. Now, if members opposite don't think that's not a worthy question to ask, go and see how Bill English feels about investing too much power in Murray McCully. If they don't get on with him, and I would understand that, then go and ask Jenny Shipley, who you can contact at Pansy Wong's electorate office, and ask her what she thinks of investing too much power in Murray McCully. And if Jenny Shipley is unavailable, then I think you could always go and see what Mr Bolger would think about that. There's a lot of form in this area about whether or not Murray McCully can take on with respect to judge. Well, he might have got he wouldn't get on well with Toh. He gets on so well with Tohenide. He organised Tohenide's coup against himself for the Māori Pacific Party. That's how good Murray McCully is when it comes to political coups. He got the political suicide in that respect. So we've opposed this bill the way through because of the fact the government would not negotiate on Part 3, because the government, part 4 rather, because the government is trying to vest too much power, and if this happens on this particular bill, we're concerned there will be bill after bill after bill where this happens, and we simply don't believe that's parliamentary, correct in terms of parliamentary procedure, sir, but we also worry intensely that by giving so much power to the individuals concerned, mistakes can be made, and we want nothing to put the Rugby World Cup at risk in 2011.
Members, the question is that the motion